What's going on, Worm Friends? Week 2 of our tote. We're going to check out how they're doing and check a few things. Moisture, how they're looking, acting, which ones are surviving the transplant of those little containers into their new home. And then we're going to feed them. I'm going to give you another feeding trick this week of another way that I'm starting to do feedings when it comes to Florida summer. Last year, one of my bins I was working on, when I started expanding them, was constantly getting maggots, and I found out, I put together that it's because of I keep them outside, the weather, and the food scraps, the way I showed you last week, it just gave them the perfect environment. When I switched the methods, I have not had that problem since. So to check moisture level, you'll see on videos where people just do a squeeze test. The other way you can do it is you can buy one of these meters in a garden shop. I got this one at Home Depot for probably $10. If you're knowing what you want to do, make a list of stuff, and when you're shopping, just look at clearance and sales. And that's a tip that you can do to save some money. A lot of my stuff I always buy in clearance or sales, and then I decide when I'm willing to pay full price for something, if you're budget conscious. So basically, we had a moisture level, a light level, and a pH level. So for moisture, we're just going to stick the prongs in. You can't see the meter here very well, but it's sitting around 5 in that spot. That spot is just a smidge drier, and it'll get wetter with today's feeding. But that spot is between 5 and 6. Overall, the median on this meter is pretty good. You don't want it too wet, too dry, so I usually shoot around 5 to 7. I go closer to 7 when they start doing cocoons. They seem to like it like that. I'm going to switch this to pH. This is a best tool to figure out if it's too acid or not. So I just stick it in there a couple inches, and the meter is reading right in the middle for that spot, and closer to 7 on the alkaline level for that spot, bouncing between 6 and 7. And it's only bouncing because my hand's not perfectly still. And overall, I'm pretty happy with this, and it comes down to the worms just becoming more active and adapting. Now I can see the bottom is pretty moist, but you can see they are becoming happy. Now they're extra squirmy because of the light, but I'd rather see them extra squirmy when I pull them into the light than not. Okay. Now, one of the reasons we like moisture is because they use the moisture to breathe through their skin. They use moisture to breathe. They don't want to be submerged in water very long, but they do need moisture. So we've checked the moisture, we've checked pH and acid. They're looking good, and all we need to do next is feed them. One way that I showed you last week was food scraps, and another way I'm going to show you this week is, aside from making your own puree, I will scrounge clearance shelves at the grocery store, and every once in a while they have baby food on clearance. And depending on their store, these ones I've gotten on clearance for 50 cents a pouch. Now, if I'm already spending, let's say, the grapes that we're feeding from last week, that was a $6 tote for probably twice as much of this, but this cost $1.50 versus that $6. Granted, we do eat from that, and then they're getting the stuff that's rotting because we don't eat it fast enough. But if you're looking for multiple ways, because you're not blending enough, you don't really have that many scraps, or whatever reason, you could do baby food. This is the same as if you took your scraps and just pureed them, which is what we're going to be doing with our scraps outside of pre-composting and regular compost bin. Any direct feedings, I'm going to be doing puree this year. That way I don't have another maggot issue. The nice thing about purees is it's basically a pre-breakdown, which makes it for immediate consumption. And unlike these grape skins, you won't have very much that stays in there that can rot or attract flies as it changes. And some food has a potential of heating up. And then all we're going to do is we're going to just spread it around. It's not a very big bin, so we're just doing the one packet. So remember, we only started with probably around 50 or so, 50 to 60 worms. It's not a very big population. And then on top of that, we're going to continue adding that bedding that I have mixed. So we're just going to use that to cover it up, which will help hide the scent from any other critters that might be curious about what's going on in the bin, and minimize fly issues or other issues that you might encounter. Now, normally I would probably do a small wetting of this bedding, but I'm not going to this time, merely because I know there's a lot of moisture on the bottom. So tomorrow or the next day, what I'll do is when I come out to check on them, because this is all liquid, so I know most of it will be absorbed, I will do a mixing of this bedding into it, and it'll get flipped to the bottom, so anything dry with that core and that paper is going to absorb the excess moisture. And it's not a lot of excess moisture, so I'm not extremely worried right now. What people have done in the past, in other videos, is they have drainage holes at the bottom, and then they have it sit on something that will capture everything that leaks out. I don't typically do that because I don't usually have that kind of moisture issue. Again, this is a bin that's balancing itself out because it's establishing all the microbiomes, and we are having a change in weather right now that is going to cold mornings, hot, so nothing is perfectly set up right now yet, as the bin itself is adapting. So some of that is the humid moisture that has dripped off of this when I checked in on it last night. If you have any questions or comments, ideas, share them in the comment section, and we'll keep going through the journey together. We're on this bin, and another video coming up, we'll be looking at other bins, including the hatcheries that we created on one of the first videos. So this week we're checking in on the worms again. We're going to feed them, but we're also going to add a new medium to the tote. We're going to add some of this peat moss. Want to make sure it's not too acidic, so we're going to take our probe and put it in our container. We have it on the moisture. We can see it's a dry. We'll switch it over to our pH. We see it's alkaline. It's not too acidic, so we know it's going to be okay. We want this one to be dry because I know it's going to be very moist in there. from how we looked at it last week. So this will help absorb some of the moisture. Now we've been periodically keeping the lid off while we're gardening. Now we can see how moist that is. It's pretty moist, which is not a horrible thing, but you can also see they're not too lively this week, but they're not under lively. You can actually see on this one, it has a good clitellum, which is a good sign. Those swollen clitellums are maturity, and when they get very fat, it means they're about to roll off a cocoon that'll have worm eggs in it. And as I dig, I can feel it's very extra moist on the very bottom. You'll see all of our bedding is turning color, which means they're working through it. And there's not a lot of food left from the feedings that we did. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this peat moss, and we're going to mix it in there. And we'll see how it looks, and then we'll add more if we need to. Usually I use coco coir, but I'm going to be starting a new seed mix experiment, and that includes peat moss, so we're going to be using some peat moss in their bedding, and I've never done that, and I've heard they do like it. So we will see as we follow this tote how they like it. And it's still pretty wet, so I'm going to grab some more. So as we put our probe in, we can see that this is still very alkaline, around 7. When we switch to moisture, it's right in the middle of moist and dry, so it's not overly wet, but I can say by their activity it's still a little too wet for what they like. We can see still looking good and healthy. Honestly, they're looking a little fatter than when we first started this tote, and that's a good sign. We'll just break up the clumps, that way we're not breaking them up inside the tote. Minimizing how much handwork needs to go in there. And as you do this, don't be afraid to pick them up and look at what they're looking like since you've started your bin. It's how you're gonna know. Now I know it's a little over wet because they're not very active, but they're not dead. Bin that's finding its own balance and growing its microbiome. My first tote also went through a small lethargic phase like this. Let's see, it's probably the first grape skin that we came across in this, so that's good. And so they are eating, and it's breaking down. They're definitely putting on some weight. That's a good thing. So as it balances out, and its moisture level, so it's finding its balance, it would definitely change their active level. And this week we're gonna do another feeding. So we're just gonna put the last of the cornmeal in here. There's not much left. There's probably like 1.5 tablespoons. More of that ground oat. Probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of a tablespoon of oyster shell. Fluff it into that top layer. And there we have another week, and they're looking good. And because there is high moisture in this one, until our check-in in a day or two, we're going to put the cardboard on the bottom this time, and then we'll put the bubble wrap on top of that. Any extra moisture will start to be absorbed by the cardboard at a small level, which is not a bad thing because they will start decomposing it. Now I do have a few critters roaming around today, so I'm just going to put the lid directly back on. Remember, we have our air holes. So they are doing okay. And that is this week's check-in.